Good morning, students. In this video, we're going to learn about plasma membrane and cytoplasm. So what's a cell? It's a bag of fluid. The plasma membrane, the outer boundary of the cell, is the bag, and the cytoplasm is the fluid. Of course, a cell is even so much more than just a bag of fluid. It's a complex, highly organized, the basic building block of all living things. And the plasma membrane and cytoplasm are actually pretty complicated. Now, what happens as you swim towards any cell? The first thing you will encounter is the gatekeeper of the cell membrane, which is also known as plasma membrane. So, don't get confused when it is written as a plasma membrane, both are the same thing. So, as you know by now, that cell membrane are found both in prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. It is important because it houses all the cell contents and also acts as a border security guard and check what goes in and out of the cell. Now in here we'll take a closer look of cell membrane. So let's just see the structure of cell membrane. A lot of models are available to explain the cell membrane, but the most widely accepted one is fluid mosaic model proposed by Singer and Nicholson in the year 1972. So let's explore the fluid mosaic model. Now, why is it called the fluid mosaic model? Well, if you go through the video, you will be clear why is it called as the fluid mosaic model. Suppose if this is a cell right over here and this is its membrane. It's kind of what keeps the inside of the cell separated from whatever is outside the cell. We are looking at a cross section of its surface. So we're down here, this is inside the cell and this is outside. And when you zoom in and this little part right over here, this is actually a phospholipid bilayer that forms it. And so when you hear that, you might say, well, what is phospholipid? And that's a good question, because when you understand what a phospholipid is, it starts to make a sense why it would form a bilayer like this. So this is a phospholipid. It's a lipid that involves a phosphate group, and in general the word lipid means something that doesn't dissolve so well in water. Fat is a kind of lipid, and you have these hydrocarbon tails that are coming from fatty acids. And so this hydrocarbon tails, they have no charge or no polarity. That's why they are not going to be attracted to the water, and the water is not going to be attracted towards them. And so these tails are hydrophobic, which means they hate water. The about polar charge, you will learn in your chemistry class that water is a polar molecule, so it is attracted towards the charged particles. And then you have a phosphate head right over here, and as you can clearly see, this has some charged molecules do well in polar substances like water, as I have told you. So they are going to dissolve well, and so this part is going to be hydrophilic, which means they love water. And actually molecules that have a hydrophilic part and a hydrophobic part, there's a special word for them, amphipathic. So phospholipids are amphipathic, which means that they have both a hydrophilic end, a part that is attracted to water, and a hydrophobic end, a part that is attracted to water. I'm sorry here, the hydrophobic end, a part that is not attracted to water. And hopefully that starts to explain why they organize themselves in this way. The hydrophilic heads are going to want to be where the water is, which is going to be either outside the cell or inside the cells. And the cells are hydrophobic. The water is going to go away from them, or they are going to go away from the water. And so they are just going to face each other, and they are going to be on the inside of the membrane. But what are all these other things that is given in the picture? Well, these are proteins embedded inside of its membrane. So instead of just thinking of it as just a kind of uniform phospholipid bilayer, there's all sort of other stuffs embedded in it. You could see there's a mosaic of things embedded in it, which means mosaic means it is which the things which are made up of different components of all different colors. So that's why it is named as a mosaic. And you can see that you have all different components here, different types of proteins. You have protein like this which go across the membrane. We call this a special class of integral protein, also called as intrinsic protein. You may have integral protein like this that might only interact with one part of the bilayer, and these have name as well, extrinsic protein or peripheral protein. You have things like glycolipids. So this right over here, this is a glycolipid. It lodges itself in the membrane because it has this lipid end. So that's going to be hydrophobic. It's going to get along with all other hydrophobic things. But then it has an end that's a chain of sugars, and that part is going to be a hydrophilic. It's going to sit outside of the cell. And this chain of sugars are actually key for cell to cell recognition. Your immune system uses this to differentiate between which cells are the ones that are actually from my body, the one I don't want to mess with, the one I want to protect, and which cells are the one that are foreign, the one that I might want to attack. When people talk about blood type, they are talking about what type of specific glycolipids do you have on cells. So it's a fascinating thing that this chain of sugars can lead to such a complex behavior. But you don't just have a sugar chains on lipids. You also have sugar chains on proteins. This right over here is an example of glycoprotein. As you can see, when you pull all this stuff together, you get a mosaic. And I'm actually not done. You have things like cholesterol embedded. Cholesterol is a lipid, so it's going to sit in the hydrophobic part of the membrane, and that's actually help with the fluidity of the membrane, making sure it is not too fluid or not too stiff. So I hope you have known that why it is called mosaic. But what about the fluid part? The cholesterol is making sure that it maintains the right amount of fluidity. If these things were to be pumped or brushed against each other, or maybe plucked out somehow, the phospholipids would just spontaneously rearrange to fill in the gaps. So this membrane actually has a consistency of dressing themselves. So it isn't like a rubber or like you might imagine like a balloon, but it's actually fluid. These things can move around, but even though it is fluid, it is good enough to separate the two environments, the environment inside the cell from the environment outside of the cell. And that's where the name fluid mosaic model comes from. We'll look into how transportation of substances takes place through cell membrane in my next video. For now, Let us come to the cytoplasm. The part of the cell is referred to as a cytoplasm are pretty different in eukaryotes and prokaryotes. In eukaryotic cells which have a nucleus, the cytoplasm is everything between the plasma membrane and the nuclear envelope. While in prokaryotes, which lack a nucleus, cytoplasm simply means everything found inside the plasma membrane. One major component of the cytoplasm in both prokaryotes and eukaryotes is the gel-like cytosol, a water-based solution that contains ions like sodium, potassium, calcium, and macromolecules like carbohydrate, proteins, lipids. So in eukaryotes, the cytoplasm is included membrane bound organelles which are suspended in the cytosol. The cytoskeleton, which means a network of fibers that supports the cell and give its shape like microfilaments, microtubules, is also a part of the cytoplasm and help to organize cellular components. Even though cytosol is mostly water, it has a semi-solid jelly-like thing because of many proteins suspended in it. Many metabolic reactions, including protein synthesis, takes place in this part of the cell.